Unlike the Great War, when Canadians were in action from April 1915 until November 1918, the Canadian Army was not under fire during the Second World War until the 2nd Division raided the French port of Dieppe on August 19, 1942. The troops involved totaled 6,100, of whom roughly 5,000 were Canadian. The plan called for attacks at 5 different points on a front of roughly 16 kilometers. 4 simultaneous flank attacks were to go in just before dawn, followed a half an hour later by the main attack on the town of Dieppe itself. Canadians would form the force for the frontal attack. Of the 4,963 Canadians who embarked for the operation, only 2,210 would return to England. 907 Canadians would lose their lives. Of the remaining 60 Canadians who walked away from Dieppe as prisoners of war, Corporal A. Robert Prouse would survive. This is his story.
Well, I knew when I saw him the first time that I was going to end up marrying him. He didn't know it, but I did. Before he left, well, I was very upset with him, and but he said, I don't think I'm going right away, but I think he knew in his heart. I think he knew he was going to go. But he did call me from Halifax, and that was on our first anniversary, and, it was very sad.
Born in Verdun, Quebec, February 14, 1911, Robert Prouse grew up during the realm of the First World War, the Great War that instilled in him a childhood dream of someday experiencing the battle and glory for himself. As the 20s roared by, Prouse faced entering adulthood in the heart of the Depression. He took a series of odd jobs, working on road crews and in the gold mines of Val-d'Or, Quebec. Finally, he got a job with a detective agency in Montreal, where he would also meet his future wife, Vera.
Because when I found out how old he was, because he was 26, and I thought, oh, he'll never take me out at this age. So when I finally told him, I said, well, I'm not 19. And he said, well, how old are you, 18? I said, no. He said, what, 17? I said, yes. He said, I wouldn't have taken you out if I'd known you were that young, And anyway, by this time, of course, we knew we were going to end up getting married, so there wasn't much he could do about it.
After he and Vera were married in the summer of '39, and war was declared, Prouse enlisted in the Canadian Provo Corps. Returning home in uniform, he very nearly broke up a perfect marriage.
He went out one day and came back with a uniform on. I was furious. And we were only married 3 months.
2 months later, Prouse would find himself in Halifax aboard the Duchess of Athol. Leaving Canada and his beloved wife behind, as he set sail for Ireland.
He enjoyed, he wanted to go for his country. I mean, he was very, very patriotic. He just, I can't even tell you. I mean, those boys there that were only 18, I mean, Bob didn't have to go. I mean, he was older and he was married. He would never have been conscripted. There was a lot of the men, like, they were forced to go. They had to, you know, the government made them go. And, I mean, I don't know exactly everything he did because they covered up a lot. They weren't allowed to give out too much information on different things. Like, even when he knew he was going to be going to Dieppe, he didn't, like, they weren't allowed to talk about it to anyone.
After an extensive period of commando training in England, Prouse yearned for battle. He was offered his chance in the summer of 1942. Further officer training, or going on what was being called a little maneuver. Prouse chose the maneuver. He went to Dieppe.
It was a real lost cause. They didn't have the coverage with the airplanes. Like, they were supposed to come over one after another, you know, all these things, and they didn't, and the boys were left there. They were on the beach, and a lot of the barges, they took off back, they went on back home. So some of the men, he said, I know he told me, so he saw one man swimming out, and he was heading out for a barge, you know, to try and catch one to get back home. He says, and believe it or not, he said he saw him in England when he got there, but got back. He said the guy had made it to a barge and got on. But a lot, you see, they were just, they just knew the Canadians were coming. And they were up on a hill, the Germans, and our boys were down, and they had these cliffs they were supposed to try and climb up, you know. They couldn't get up. They had no way of getting out of it, except hide behind barges and get close to the wall and stuff like that. You don't get a lot of news, you know. You have to rely on the newspaper, or if you went to a theater, they always had a news thing on before they showed the picture, and that was where you got a lot of news, you know.
Following a brief journey, the No. 2 Provo Corps arrived in Portsmouth, and among being assigned Sten machine guns, were issued notepaper to write their last letters home.
It was very emotional and like full of, you know, lots of love, and you know, they don't know when their last letter, whether they're going to write again. I mean, so there was so many, it's hard to tell you exactly, like, it was just all the feelings he had for me, and the feelings for our country, and it was so different. And
as the morning papers showed, the little maneuver that was once called Dieppe had become a disaster, and Vera was left uncertain about her husband's whereabouts.
like, I hadn't heard from him, and then we got a telegram saying he was missing in action. Well, then you don't hear for about 3 months later before you really know what's happened, you know. But I had gone to a psychic. Funny, you know, a lot of us used to do that. And you had to give them something belonging to the person, you know, and this woman would walk around the room. I was anxious to know if she knew anything about him. But anyway, she's thinking and everything, and then finally she says, oh, she said, I see barbed wire. And he was taken prisoner. Oh, I can't.
As a prisoner of war, the Red Cross would serve as Prouse's life support. However, for the next 2 years, communication would become more difficult.
He used to say if it wasn't for the Red Cross parcels, they would have starved to death, because there were Russians in another part of the camp, like barbed wire was separating them. And he said, you know, they were so thin that if they went under a shower, they would fall to the floor. And he said, many a time, he said he'd give him a piece of their bread, pass it through the wire, you know, for the Russian. He said, I felt so sorry for them, but the one German who was kind of friendly with our boys, he says, oh, you're crazy, don't waste your bread. He said, he's not going to live, he'll be dead. And Bob said, well, he said, I'd rather give a piece of my bread, you know. He said, I can't watch them. Things like that. And then he talked about being shackled, how I knew about that, because everything was censored. Any letter you got, you could only get a line here and a line there. But he happened to talk about the horse. We had an old horse on the farm, and he was talking, and this horse had been beaten before we had him. The horse's name was Daisy. He said, I know now, he said, what Daisy went through.
I think the part that hit me the most was when they were marched out of the camp at the end.
Mm.
And the only thing that my father brought with him was a copy of the robe, the book, and his diary. And I mean, they were marching for days, and I mean, he had dysentery. A lot of the men did, and they'd fall back, and finally he was just laying there on the side of the road, just, you know.
Well, the Germans would shoot them if they didn't get up.
But he finally just said, "Go on, I can't," you know.
Although a most trying experience, the Germans' death march proved fruitless, and Prouse was eventually liberated.
He came up and he phoned that he was coming, so my dad took me down, and you know, you feel kind of strange, and he looked so thin because he'd been through so much.
It was 6 years too.
We were 6 years apart, and you don't know what you're going to feel or anything, but it's a funny thing. The minute you give each other a hug or a kiss, you know, all of a sudden it all comes back, and you're just back where you were before the war. So it was really, I don't know, I can't explain it. It was just there, you know, you could feel it in your heart. And so then we went home, and I couldn't wait for him to get out of that uniform, though.
For Prouse, the war was over, but his memories would last forever.
He did. Every time he heard an airplane go over, I didn't know what was the matter with him. He'd leap out of bed and he'd get on the floor, you know, and he'd just cover his head. And then he told me, he said, I thought it was the bombs going, you know, because they'd be bombing even though they were in prison camp. And I know we had word from Ottawa that when they come back, if they want to break something, let them break it. If they want to, you know, just let them do what they want to do. Don't, because they've been stuck together for so long and they've been, you know, confined. So let them release their feelings. And I know one night he had this pillow on me, and I said, I'm fighting him, you know. I said, Bob, what are you doing, you know? And he said, oh, I thought you were German. You know, like he was dreaming about it, and so, you know, it was pitiful, but things like that. And then one time he was really mad at something, I don't know what, and he just put his fist right through the bathroom wall, you know, just a bang, and he could never. My husband passed away, and we often say, you know, there's a flash there, that's probably Dad in the, you know. But that's the only one I've got all dressed up, and somebody thought to bring the camera.